Harlem, Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, also known as Bumpy Johnson. You see, Bumpy was about 21 years older than Malcolm, so he was always the big homie. When Malcolm crossed over West Indian Archie, he was a dead man. Bumpy was the one that helped Malcolm escape Harlem when he fled to Boston. In the early 40s, Malcolm used to run the streets with Red Fox. Malcolm and Red Fox were committing crimes together, robbing people, beating people up, stealing. Bumpy was frustrated with Malcolm because he kept telling him to get out of the streets. Bumpy saw early on that Malcolm wasn't a gangster. Although Bumpy was a gangster, Bumpy always took care of Harlem. If Bumpy saw a family getting evicted, he would pay that family's debts. Bumpy would spend thousands of dollars on Christmas for kids in the neighborhood. On Thanksgiving, Bumpy would pass out turkeys and other foods for Harlem. Bumpy and Malcolm met in the early 40s. The two reconnected in the 60s. By the time the 60s came, Bumpy was arrested over 40 times. Bumpy did time in Sing Sing, Leavenworth, Dannemora, and even Alcatraz. Allegedly, Bumpy was the man that orchestrated the escape from Alcatraz. Although he didn't escape himself, Bumpy assisted. That was Bumpy, always helping out. Prison officials said Bumpy was the only inmate at that time that had enough power to have a boat waiting on the outside. Alcatraz is on the island. The only way that you can escape is on a boat. By the time the 60s came, Malcolm was a changed man. Bumpy was still that guy. Around the time Malcolm was getting ready to leave the Nation of Islam, the two started getting closer. Malcolm told Bumpy about the death threats. In the NOI newspaper called Muhammad Speaks, the December 4th issue, 1964, there was a 5-page attack on Malcolm by the minister Louis Farrakhan. Bumpy told Malcolm, if you wanted Farrakhan dead, you just say the word. All you have to do is make that call. And Bumpy sent a message to the Nation of Islam saying the only reason you niggas still walking around breathing is because of Malcolm. Bumpy was ready to go to war, but Malcolm declined. Malcolm said he didn't want black folks killing other black folks. If you're questioning whether or not Bumpy had enough power to go up against the Nation of Islam, let me give you a better understanding of who Bumpy was. Bumpy ran with some pretty serious dudes. Nat Pettigrew, Alabama Black, Finley, Junie Bird, Poor Johnny, Vince Prince, Hoss Steele, Pretty Ricky, Georgie Boy, Frank Lucas, and Bub Hewlett, just to name a few. Frank Lucas, around the time he joined the circle, Frank had 5 contracts on his head. Once Bumpy put the word out into the streets, all 5 contracts disappeared. Bub Hewlett, do you remember the scene from the movie Hoodlum? When Dutch Schultz was in the restaurant with Bub, and after Dutch got done eating, he told Bub to gather up those scraps to take home to his family. In Bumpy's biography, Harlem's Godfather, written by Mamie Johnson, she said Bub would have taken a bullet before Dutch talked to him that way. Bumpy couldn't even talk to Bub that way. Other people that was around Bub during that time said there's no way Dutch would have talked to Bub that way. Bumpy also had the blessings from Lucky Luciano and the Genovese family. At this time, Bumpy was the only black man that could make deals with the Italian mob. Bumpy and Lucky used to meet once a week to have dinner and play chess. Bumpy had got sent to prison, and when he got released after his 10-year stretch, Bumpy had gained so much weight, everyone was asking Bumpy what happened. Bumpy said he was in on the inside eating the Italian time. Bumpy said the Italians was getting food shipped in, and they were cooking and eating all day. After Bumpy's release, he had a sit-down meeting with Fat Tony Salerno. While Bumpy was away, the Italians moved in on a numbers game in Harlem. Harlem was Bumpy's territory. The reason Bumpy went to war with Dutch Schultz was because he tried to move into the numbers game in Harlem. Dutch Schultz was a former bootlegger and driver for Arnold Rothstein. So during this meeting with Tony Salerno, everything was very intense. Bumpy pounded his fist on the table, raised his voice, and told Tony, "You can have the rest of New York, but Harlem is mine." After this meeting, Bumpy sent the message to Lucky Luciano. Lucky sent the message to Fat Tony. Lucky told Tony, Bumpy is to get whatever he wants. This was the type of power that Bumpy had. Bumpy didn't only roll with gangsters. Bumpy also hung out with many celebrities. Bumpy and his wife, Mamie Johnson, used to go on double dates with Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis. Before Malcolm's assassination, Malcolm wanted to distance himself from Bumpy for 2 reasons. One, he didn't want to get the press any more heat, and for 2, he didn't want to provoke the Nation of Islam by being surrounded by a bunch of gangsters carrying guns. Everyone knew Bumpy, and everyone knew Bumpy's reputation. And that reputation meant violence.
God has made me a better man for you than Malcolm X. I'm standing where Malcolm would have stood if he had the character to stand where I'm standing. And frankly, it ain't none of your business. What have you got to say about it? Did you teach Malcolm? Did you make Malcolm? Did you clean up Malcolm? Did you put Malcolm out before the world? Was Malcolm your traitor or was he ours? And if we dealt with him like a nation deals with a traitor, what the hell business is it of yours? You just shut your mouth and stay out of it.
Malcolm didn't know what he was playing with. No, he didn't. He didn't know what he was playing with. You don't jump up against a divine messenger of God like he did. He asked to die. And God obliged him. No, you don't understand. Like someone said, did you Muslims kill Malcolm? So the messenger said, and what if we did? He said, what if we did? Have you ever seen a leader scandalized like Malcolm scandalized Muhammad? Have you ever heard of anything like that? Don't you know if you scandalize a man who's loved and honored by the people, what are you asking for? You're asking for death. And he got what he asked for. And those who killed him, they weren't sneaking behind no damn counter. They came into place where the man was preaching and killed him in front of his own followers. That's fearless men. And those who were there to guard him, they were ducking. Damn cowardly dogs. Ducking and running under poles instead of trying to protect the man. And you say as your leader, you're a damn punk, you don't have no leader. If he's your leader, why the hell don't you stand up for him? Now all of a sudden they can serve you a dead man on a platter. And you eat him up as your leader, not knowing nothing about him while he was alive and know less about him now that he's dead. Malcolm's momentum carried him to his death.